Our scripture reading is from 1 Samuel, the first chapter, verses 1 through 20. A reading from the book. There was a certain man of Ramathaim, a Zuphite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraimite.
It helps to have an Old Testament. He's a scholar reading this. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his town to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord.
On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb.
So it went on year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, "Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?"
After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow, "O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head."
As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine." But Hannah answered, "No, my Lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time."
Then Eli answered, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then the woman went to her quarters, ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer.
They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, "I have asked him of the Lord." Hear what God is saying to the people.
Thanks be to God.
You've just heard some of my story, but that was decades ago. My son Samuel is now a grown man, well established as a priest, judge, and prophet at Ramah. My other 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, have all grown up as well. I'm blessed with many grandchildren, although not all of them follow God's ways. Some of those grandchildren have been asking me to tell them about when I was young. So I've been reflecting on my life as I sit in the sun outside my house. Some days I'm struck by how boldly I acted, how much initiative I took. And other days I'm struck by how much God did, working through my grief for the good of the nation, serving purposes that reach well beyond me and my family. As I reflect, I'm amazed at my boldness years ago. Who was I? I was a peasant woman, a barren wife, living in an obscure village. There was nothing out of the ordinary about me. I didn't even have the sons that would give me status in my society. Elkanah, my husband, said he loved me, and he did feed me. But I confess, I'd have been happier if he had told me that I was worth 10 sons to him, rather than hoping that he was worth 10 sons to me. I was bullied by Penina, my husband's second wife, so smug and so often pregnant. Oh, how I wanted a son. I wanted to prove that I could be fruitful. I wanted the joy of nursing him, of snuggling with him, of watching him take his first steps, of having him call me mama. And like so many mothers, I had high hopes for my children. I wanted them to do the great things that I could imagine. We were a devout family. Elkanah ensured that we went to Shiloh to sacrifice every year. This should have been reassuring, but instead it just seemed to make me more miserable. I so desperately wanted God's help, but the ritual and Penina just reminded me how marginal and unsuccessful I was. Why, oh, why had God not answered my prayers? Perhaps it was the horror of Shiloh's priests. Like all regular visitors offering sacrifice, I knew how Eli's sons were cheating all the Israelites who came there. They took more than they were allotted from the sacrifices. And then they lay with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Either Eli didn't have a clue, or he was the one who taught him the tricks. It was shameful. So you've heard what I did. In desperation, I went straight to God and made a vow. I didn't talk with Elkanah first to get his permission for my bold idea. I didn't pray out loud, as would have been expected. Not only was I so upset that I couldn't speak clearly, but I didn't want to provoke resistance. Because you know, Elkanah could have undone my vow. We Israelites are in the habit of making vows at times of deep lament. Some see this as a way of getting God to do what we want. I tend to see it as a way of looking forward in hope of God's faithfulness and mercy. I really don't know if I'd really thought it through that day. But I went and I vowed that if I had a son, I would give him to God. He would be a Nazirite, one specially consecrated. Perhaps he could live at Shiloh and clean up the mess. You know, become a reliable judge like we used to have. What audacity I had. I never asked Eli the priest to pray for me. I even talked back to him. The first word out of my mouth was, no. Can you imagine? I told him I was not a worthless woman, that I was not drunk. I was just deeply troubled. I didn't bother to mention that his sons were worthless. Eli, in whatever confused state he was in, came around. He spoke the oracle of salvation I was glad to hear, with no idea how it would change his own life. So that's what I think on some days. But on other days, I see myself not so much as a bold actor, but as a creature of God's sovereignty. The older I get, the more I see and puzzle over the working of divine providence. I was living my life, being faithful as I knew how to be faithful, being miserable, and making a vow that would be so much harder to fulfill than I'd ever imagined. For this barren woman, it was a barren time with no hint of a future. Yet God was faithfully at work in that time of waiting. And now, from the other end of my life, I can say, God did it. Everything seems to me, in some way, to have taken its natural course and to have been determined necessarily and straightforwardly by a higher providence. It may be that in my desperation, something in me broke free. I was free to be myself, and the more fully I became myself, it seems, the more fully God was able to use me for divine purposes. I acted out of my deep desire. God remembered me and gave me the son I asked for. Indeed, Samuel is more than I could have asked or imagined. Samuel is indeed a gift of God's power. He has such an important role to play in our nation's life. As I watch him lead, to my amazement, I realize that I became an agent of God's intended future. My story is a witness to God's transformative power, which created a new historical possibility where none existed. I'm seeing far-reaching social change through our ordinary domestic conflict in our ordinary household. God did not provide the restoration of the judgeship that I'd imagined. Samuel did function this way for a while, but now, for reasons that I do not understand, my son has anointed Saul to be king over Israel. He told the people this was a bad idea, and then he did it anyway. At some level, I just have to trust that once again, God is creating a new beginning, a way forward. God has this habit of making life over and over again by God's inexplicable but relentless transformative power. Who knows? Perhaps one day the king will inspire prayers for yet another new start. So, what do I tell my grandchildren when they visit with me in the sunshine? First, I say, pray. Pour out your heart before God. Cast the sometimes overwhelming burden of daily life often on God. Be candid in your prayers. You don't have to be great to be heard. I certainly wasn't. God responds to those who suffer humiliation and discrimination. God listens and God remembers. And I also tell them that they should pray to be ready for the responsibility that goes with the answer to their prayer. And then I say to them, act. Make decisions. Take risks in hope. You may need to take on big responsibilities, like I did when I shaped Samuel's life, giving him to Eli. I've heard it said that we're made in the image of God. God takes action. God brings about change, and so do we. This means that we get to participate in divine providence. If God suggests a vow to you, keep it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it will be easy. It can be hard. I really missed Samuel when he was growing up. I also say to my grandchildren, remember that God is free. God acts in God's own ways. It's within God's freedom that we are free to pray and to act. Many of my prayers were not answered as I'd hoped they would be. God both closed and opened my womb. My hope for Israel was shaped by my experience with our judges. I certainly never prayed for a king. But as I've just said, a king is what God is giving us through Samuel, part of the answer to my prayer. As I reflect on my life, I'd have to say that somehow divine and human freedom interact to give shape and meaning to history. And then finally, I tell my grandchildren to be grateful, to offer God praise and thanksgiving. Keep an eye out for what God is doing. God has a well-deserved reputation for disrupting the social order. When I dedicated Samuel to God at Shiloh, I sang a song celebrating my own experience, my recognition of God's involvement in lifting me up. And much to my amazement, my song is now being sung along with the songs of Miriam and Deborah, those great women from our history. I suspect that others will modify my song. Indeed, I've heard rumors that some are already modifying it to be more about God's work in kings than in barren women or judges. But in any case, I've taught my song to my grandchildren, and I'm happy to share it with you. Perhaps one day you will modify it to celebrate what you've seen our free God doing through your prayer and action. My heart exults in the Lord. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your victory. There is no holy one like the Lord, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low. He also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. May it be so.